All right, everybody, let's take a quick look at this game that I played. The reason I'm showing it is because it highlights some of the challenges we all face in the opening when it comes to pushing pawns, especially when we are in an opening that maybe we aren't familiar with, right? And we push pawns to kind of try to force some things to go our way or react to how our opponent's doing. But the one reminder I want to give to everyone is don't push a pawn unless you're ready to change the entire game. Once you push a pawn, you can never unpush it, right? So by pushing a pawn, you change that game permanently. So even though your pawns are your least valuable pieces on the board, they're the ones that require some of the most concentration and most forethought before you push it. Because once you push that pawn, you've permanently changed the game. So think about it before you push it. All right. So I was white in this game, and I started with my normal queen's pawn. My opponent responded with this Horowitz defense. I don't know the Horowitz defense, but I continue with my plan of like a queen's gambit because my opponent can easily transition to a queen's gambit. Maybe I can even do a Catalan in the future. I don't know, but this is a setup that I'm comfortable with, so I decided to continue it. My opponent continued with this Horowitz defense. I'm not sure. I'm not very comfortable with how this looks. I don't know this opening, so I decided to play this game from a standpoint of, okay, I'm now in unknown opening territory. I'm going to try to make some good moves. I'm going to keep my eye open for opportunities to transition into like a Catalan type structure, but I'm okay if it doesn't go that way. One attacker, one defender, I'm okay, but I decided to continue to develop my standard developing, puts an extra defender there. I'm really happy here. This pawn push I don't understand. By itself, this is obvious. My opponent's going to fianchetto their dark square bishop. Probably going to castle kingside, and that king sitting there with a fianchettoed bishop. That's a strong setup. I have no complaints on it. But I don't know what this structure is in the face of these three pawns. I don't, again, so I'm now treating this as a very unknown opening. I don't know. I'm just going to make good moves where I see fit. This is kind of like, I know that there's an opening. I don't know the opening where opponents push pawns and kind of make what they call a hedgehog structure, right? All the little spikies, right? So this is a spike, a little spike. Look like little hedgehog spikes. I know there's an opening called a hedgehog. I don't know the hedgehog, but this has got kind of that hedgehog-y type feel to it. So maybe my opponent's going for like a defensive structure. Okay. My opponent's pushed three pawns. I'm going to push three pawns. Now the question is, do I push E3 or do I push E4? This is the move that I'm least happy with on my side of the board. I could have looked at closing this down, right? A couple trades in the center, and then pushing E4. I decided to push E4, right? Really strong center, but unfortunately it does open up some lines into my position. All right, so this line is not quite open because the knight's in the way, but it does open up some lines into my position. Probably could have waited on that, but I had just played a game previously where my E-pawn had gotten in my own way, and I'd kind of, actually the previous video on here, my E-pawn had kind of gotten in my own way, and I kind of got a little cramped. So I thought, there is nothing targeting my E-pawn. There's not even a knight here. So go for it, right? I have the upper hand. I'm going to push my E-pawn, get it out of the way. My dark square bishop can move. Everybody's got breathing room. My light square bishop can get out eventually, or I can fianchetto it. And with the fianchetto, it's extra defense. My knight's going to go here with extra defense. So this is a perfect opportunity to try out an E4 push. I can't say that I'm in love with it, but it may just be the timing. It may just been, too early to tell. But we knew my opponent was going to fianchetto. 2 attackers, 2 defenders. I'm totally okay. I just continue developing. Again, I got a little bit of defense on my E-pawn. Now let's talk about attackers and defenders real quick. All right. when you are counting attackers and defenders, a couple of tricks that I've tried to internalize. Number one is, if I am the attacker and there's an even number of attackers and an even number of defenders, if I'm the attacker, I'm giving up all of my attackers for the piece or the square that I'm contemplating attacking, and all of the defenders except the last one. The last one is going to be the one that sits there when it's all said and done. So from the defender's standpoint, when you're counting attackers and defenders, think about what's the last defender I'm going to bring into it, because that's the one that's going to live on the board at the end of the day. Everything else is going to get wiped out, and that one's going to be sitting there. So from this perspective, my opponent's going to give up a pawn and a bishop to take a pawn and a knight. Right? Let's see if I can do this. So a pawn and a knight versus a pawn and a bishop. That's an even trade. Okay. At the end of that, my final defender is going to be the one that lives on the board. So I'm going to have a centralized queen at the end of the day, right in the center of the board. Am I okay with that? Is my opponent okay with that? Let's see how it goes. My opponent decides to go ahead and make the first capture. I'm comfortable here. My opponent makes the second capture. And I think this is where the game started to fall apart. So, at the end of the day, I now have a queen in the center of the board. Okay, my queen is undefended. So I need to do something with it. Worst case scenario, I can always bring it home. If I have to, I can stick a bishop under there. But my queen is centralized. My opponent has opened up a few lines. And that's something that they need to take care of. I don't know if they noticed it, didn't notice it, or chose to ignore it. If you look at the time, we were both playing this pretty quickly. Right, this is a 10+5 game. My opponent's at 10:07 on the clock, and I'm at 9:54, excuse me. So we were both playing this really fast. My opponent popped off this next move and drop a rook. So I go ahead and I grab what could be a free rook. Now there are some issues. There are some ways that a queen can be trapped, and so you have to be extra careful not to trap your queen. In this case, the knight is pinned, so the knight can't move. One of the ways to trap the queen would be something like this. Notice this knight is covering this square and this square. If this knight were to be able to make it to f6, it defends this pawn, and the only good square for my queen at that moment in time would be here, the knight here, and then I'd have to try to somehow squeeze out this way and then out before the game collapsed on me, right? So there are ways that you can trap someone's queen when they infiltrate this early. Unfortunately, in this case, this knight is pinned. The queen would have to come up, and if I had to make a queen trade at this point in time, I would take it gladly. So when I analyzed this over the board, I felt like my queen was not going to get trapped, so I was okay. So I moved on. My opponent, right now the knight is under attack. So my opponent moved the king out of the way, and by moving this king, now the knight is free to move. Now this square, this square, this square are all taken away. The knight is free to move. If the knight moves, yes, I could make a queen trade and I would be happy about it. But again, there's the danger of trapping my queen. The pawn in this case is free, so I grab the pawn, and now I've opened up a line to get the heck out of Dodge. I'm feeling much better about my queen safety. My opponent now finally gets the knight out of the way, attacks my queen. This is probably my longest think in the game, and I ended up thinking about, do I bring the knight or the queen all the way back here to h3, or I could stick it on h4. And I said to myself, oh, h4 pins the knight. You know what else could pin the knight? My bishop. So then I started looking at what happens if I pin this knight. Now my queen is no longer under attack. Things could get interesting. Which point in time my opponent goes for... Now notice, I have also opened up some serious lines, right? Now there is Lots of lines in front of my king are open. Notably, this really wide open d-file. I need to get working on my development and get castled or get my king to safety somehow. My opponent goes for a counterattack, and you can see this classic fork. This is a very classic fork. I could defend it by sticking a bishop here, and that's probably what I would recommend to everyone to defend this classic fork. If you can get your bishop here. Yeah, other than that, I'm trying to think, but okay. So my opponent's going for this counterattack. I've already taken a rook, so giving up a rook, or giving back the rook, would even the material. But there's a tactic here. Two attackers. Only one defender. That defender's the king. There's really no way for my opponent to get another defender on this knight. So I'm going to pick up this knight. At the end of the day, at the end of all the things that happen, I'm going to pick up this knight. My opponent continues with their attack. I move the king out of the way. They pick up the rook. Now, however, their knight is trapped. So I'm going to pick up this knight, and eventually I might find a way to pick up this knight as well. Something to consider. There's a few dangers in this position, though. Do you see them? Yeah, what happens if I take with the queen? Because now it's check. The king has to move one of these three directions. The only available moves is to move the king one of those three directions. Moving the king this way or this way drops a full queen. Moving the king this way still drops a queen because it's defended. My queen is defended by the bishop, and the only defender would be the king. So in this case, the best... I don't want to say this game is over at this point in time, but I am up a ton of material, and I'm about to pick up a free queen. The best thing my opponent could do would be to move the king up the board. Moving backwards allows me to capture the queen with check. Moving backwards allows me to capture the queen with checkmate. Notice the only available squares for my opponent to run away are covered by my queen, and the queen's covered by the bishop. If my opponent had gone back, again, I get with check. Opponent can move. Check again. This is getting harder and harder, but the game basically falls apart. I could grab with check. Check. That's checkmate, because it's check, and this are taken away by the queen. So yeah, there are lots of pitfalls here. So the really only best option is for my opponent to go up the board, give up the free queen, but live to fight another day. However, if we look at the analysis on this, oh, never mind. It's still checkmate in 3. It's still checkmate in 3. So yep, there is no live to fight another day. Yep, okay, never mind. I didn't look at the analysis ahead of time. So no matter what, as soon as my king gets here, as soon as my queen gets here, it's checkmate in 4. Yeah, I saw the escape route here. I just figured pick up a queen, but realistically... No, I guess you can pick up the queen. See, these are all covered, these are all covered. This is covered. So that comes with check. Yeah, I mean, it's... Oof. Yeah, I mean, I guess any way you slice it, it becomes checkmate. All right, I hadn't I hadn't looked at the analysis ahead of time. I should have. Oh well. Anyway, so I'm just gonna go back to the beginning here. The idea here is that we both made a lot of pawn moves very quickly, and by at least having some kind of connected structure, it blocks not only the straights but also the diagonals. And that's something to consider, whereas my opponent had these kind of disconnected, and so you have a lot of gaps. And then these trades in the center of the board were not bad, but I think, again, the lesson that we can learn is after the trade, right, one attacker, one defender, if the attacker moves, the defending piece is what stays on the board. So is my opponent okay with, at this point in time, you have to ask yourself, are you okay with having a queen in the center of the board with this diagonal opened up? And you have to answer, no, I'm not okay with that. So I'm just going to leave my knight, my bishop here for now. Let's rotate my knight around. Still too early to give up that diagonal. Maybe we see something like this. Castle. And now that becomes a valid trade. All right, guys. Anyway, so the idea here is that when you push a pawn, remember that's a permanent change. When you have attackers and defenders, try to figure out what's going to be the final piece on the board. Typically, in this case, it's pretty obvious I'm not going to give up my queen. So the queen is going to be the final defender, and that's going to be the living defender at the end of the day. Count up all your attackers. If the defenders are even, then your attackers are, is it worth for you to trade away all of your attackers for the defending piece and all the rest of the defending pieces except for the last one? All right, so in this case, the two attackers, the piece under attack, and the one of the defenders, and the queen is going to be living at the end of the day right there in the center of the board. Something to keep in mind. As fast as my opponent played this, I think they were expecting this to be a very good move, develop with tempo, except for the fact that they left this open. So it happens to all of us. I do it a lot of times too because I want to push this pawn to solidify this structure, and that ends up opening my dark square diagonal. So it's something I have to be careful of as well. So just keep an eye on your pawns. When you push a pawn, understand the lines that you're opening, and good luck to you guys in your games. We're both of us were in our high 1400s, low 1500s. My opponent's actually rated a little bit higher than me, so I feel very. I mean, I'm happy. What is it? 14 moves? Yeah, 14 move checkmate. That was a fun one for me. Delete all this. Yeah, 14 move checkmate against a higher rated opponent. I'm happy. But the lessons we can learn from this are count attackers and defenders and figure out what's going to be the remaining living piece, and don't push pawns unless you absolutely have to. So get out there, play some games, go forth, enjoy, have fun, and I'll catch you guys next time. Bye.